By 2310, tensions within Far Harbor reached their peak. The harbormen, who had grown increasingly frustrated with the presence of Commonwealth forces and their puppet government, began to rise up. Riots broke out in Far Harbor. They were put down violently by Commonwealth troops. But this only led to more harbormen joining the resistance groups. To combat this growing instability, President Grant ordered the creation of the Commonwealth Marshals, who would be under the command of the Commonwealth Police Bureau instead of the military. The hope was that they would be able to mediate between the military and harbormen, playing the role of a third party. The harbormen strongly disliked the Commonwealth military. They claimed the military engaged in corruption, abuse, and other immoral and illicit activities. For the longest time, there was nothing they could do, so they turned to vigilantism. Often they kidnapped and killed troops, or sometimes just attacked entire military installations. The job of the marshals would be to provide the harbormen a proper way to combat the military's actions without violence. Multiple soldiers, Marines, Minutemen, and even Brotherhood troops were arrested and tried for things ranging from extortion to crimes against humanity. This helped ease tension as it restored some of the hope in the democratic process. But unfortunately, many historians agree that it was too little too late, and the damage had already been done. The Commonwealth would have to combat the harbormen insurgents who weren't buying the Commonwealth's promises of a better future. These actions also had the negative effect of angering many within the military and Brotherhood. They felt the president was undermining their counterinsurgency efforts and was growing weak to harbormen lies. At the same time, the Brotherhood demanded the Commonwealth release the Brotherhood prisoners. When the Commonwealth refused, the Brotherhood pulled all their troops from Far Harbor and threatened to launch an attack on Boston. Thankfully, cooler heads prevailed and war was narrowly avoided, as a deal was agreed upon, in which the Brotherhood prisoners would serve sentences in the capital wasteland and Brotherhood troops would withdraw from the Commonwealth. While war was averted, this did sour relations between the Brotherhood and Commonwealth. It marked a shift towards a more hostile relationship. Despite all this, most would agree that the president's decisions did manage to stop possibly thousands from joining the harbormen resistance groups. Thus, peace prevailed. While the Commonwealth attempted to restore order in Far Harbor, the Atomites took advantage of the chaos and striked at the Commonwealth forces. Multiple bases were seized as Commonwealth troops were forced to retreat. These attacks were quick and brutal. They also saw the deployment of gas, which before this was extremely rare. Atomites would launch gas canisters into the compounds in order to force the Commonwealth troops to evacuate the compound or face a brutal, slow, and painful death. In response, the military started to issue gas masks to all soldiers. But unfortunately, the gas would continue to claim many more lives throughout the war. It was clear the war with the Atomites was about to escalate once more. However, the DIA had a plan to bring an end to the Atomites once and for all. The DIA, who had undercover agents and informants within the Atomite alliance, had received information of a growing rift within the group. More traditionalist Atomites, dissatisfied with High Confessor Killian's leadership and reforms, had begun talking about possibly splitting from the core group. DIA agents posing as staunch Atomites helped fuel the fire by spreading disinformation amongst the two sides to rile them up. Eventually, tensions would reach their boiling point, and Zealot Darug announced his forces would no longer take orders from High Confessor Killian, but they would continue the war against the Commonwealth occupiers. This was a great loss to the Atomites, as Zealot Darug was a skilled commander, and his men were amongst some of the most elite the Atomites had. Not wanting the group to fall into civil war, High Confessor Killian met with the rebels to attempt and strike a deal. However, the talks would fail and only serve to make things worse. Killian was immediately met with hostility by Dara and his loyalists, who did not believe in Killian's promises of better reform. The two men would enter into a heated argument. Guns were drawn, and before anyone knew it, there was shooting. Both men would escape the firefight unharmed, but this event cemented the split, and now both sides were gathering their loyalists and preparing for a new war. While ideologically similar, the groups had two very different approaches to dealing with the Commonwealth. Dara and his loyalists created the Holy State of Atom, a more conservative and traditionalist wing of the religion. The Holy State was more focused on building their own holy kingdom. They prioritized military doctrine and the taking of territory. Composed of some of Atom's most elite and zealous fighters, the group was very successful at this. They moved away from Killian's insurgent warfare doctrine and adopted a more conventional approach. Former zealot Dara was a skilled commander who served in the Gunners and fought in the Gunner Wars against the Commonwealth. His unit, the Radiant Angels, was also composed of mostly former Gunners and their descendants. The Commonwealth was a familiar foe, and they fought like it. Commonwealth troops who fought against the Angels often noted the group as being well-coordinated, disciplined, and composed of expert marksmen. Staff Sergeant Sean Devon had the following to say about his encounter with the Angels. It was a normal patrol like any other, when suddenly bullets started flying all around us. We dropped to the ground but were quickly overwhelmed by the superior enemy force. We could hear the enemy getting closer as the Atomites closed in on our position. We wanted to retreat, but there was no escape. To make matters worse, they began calling terrifyingly accurate artillery fire on us. We heard as the footsteps got closer and prepared for our last stand. We were sure that this was our final day on this earth, but as they were about to peek their heads over our improvised foxhole, the cavalry arrived. If it wasn't for our boys in the skies, we would have certainly met our fate. In my 12 years of service, that was easily the most terrifying firefight I had been in. It was like fighting the damn Gunners all over again. The Holy State would launch a large-scale assault on multiple Commonwealth positions in and around Far Harbor. Battles would ensue all over the region, with some of the most popular being the Battle for Trenton Bridge, where an overwhelmingly large force of Atomites assaulted the town of Trenton in an attempt to seize the bridge connecting Far Harbor to the mainland, and the Battle for Northeast Harbor, where Atomites once again used overwhelming numbers to take a strategically important location, this time being the ports of Northeast Harbor, which gave the Commonwealth access to the southern parts of the island. These victories put the Holy State on the map and shifted all eyes to the rising power. On the other side of the aisle is Adam's United Front, led by High Confessor Killian. The group is by far the largest of the two, as most Atomite cells in New England pledged their allegiance to Killian and the United Front. Despite this, the group was not nearly as successful militarily. Killian saw the more conventional approach of the Holy State as a fool's errand. He had the following to say in the matter. What Dara and his heretical lackeys fail to understand is that the Commonwealth will not be weak forever. The instability in Far Harbor will pass, and what will they do then? Do they really think that they'll be able to compete with the industrial base of the Commonwealth? With the tens of thousands of troops and thousands of armor and artillery pieces? They will be struck down just like we were the first time, and they'll run into the fog just like we did. Yet their criticisms of us will surely never cease. Even if they were to win, what does he know about running a state? He spent all his life as a gun for hire and a foot soldier doing what he's told by his masters, and now he thinks he can rule the world? The fool will drive his phony state to the ground with his stupidity. Killian focused on the long game. He planned on forcing the Commonwealth into a war of attrition. The idea being that once the Commonwealth became exhausted enough, they'd finally come to the negotiating table. To accomplish this, Killian brought together insurgent groups all across New England and formed the United Front with the help of the railroad. He hoped to use these groups to apply pressure in multiple fronts to force the Commonwealth's attention away from Far Harbor and wear them down quicker. The plan seemed to have been working, but it all started to fall apart as the railroad had been nearly driven to complete defeat by the Commonwealth forces. They would first slow down and eventually halt the transfer of supplies to the Atomites as the railroad became more desperate for supplies themselves. Then they would pull out of the alliance and with them most non-Atomite groups. Now the United Front had grown smaller and weaker, but things would only get worse as Dara and his loyalists split off from the group and caused a civil war, only further dividing and weakening the Atomites. Still, they held on and maintained their foothold in the region, but unfortunately for the Atomites, things were about to get much worse. 2312. The railroad has finally been defeated and there is peace in the Commonwealth again. The military is now focusing all their resources in the northern expansion in Far Harbor. The Holy State and Adam's United Front have been fighting each other for 2 years now, and the Commonwealth has used their infighting to regain lost territory. Multiple raids were executed by Minutemen Special Forces, Army Commandos, and Marine Raiders to capture or kill high-ranking Atomites. They were aided by the DIA, who was now focusing their own resources in rooting out the resistance in the north. They provided locations, schedules, and other valuable information to the military in order for them to more easily track and eliminate their targets. Dara was killed in a raid by Army Commandos. Along with him, multiple high-ranking commanders of the Holy State were targeted and eliminated. High Confessor Killian and his most high-ranking officials were all killed in one raid. They had been holding their yearly meeting of the commanders. This was discovered by the DIA, and the information was passed on to the Minutemen who were operating in the area. On the day of the meeting, troops surrounded the compound, and when they were sure it had begun, vertibirds flew over it, dropping mortar shells and firing at the wooden structure. Commandos stood outside and picked off any escapees, while the Minutemen Special Forces entered the compound and eliminated any who got in their way. One by one, the Atomite cells began to fall, and by 2314 they were in extreme disarray. The groups fragmented into even smaller cells and had been all but exterminated by the Commonwealth. Some minor groups would remain and cause terror occasionally, but never to the level they once had. By 2316, the conflict had largely died down. In 2329, Natalie Wright was elected president, and she would run on a platform of finally bringing an end to the conflict. A year later, she would make good on that promise as she finally integrated Far Harbor and many of the northern territories into the Union as proper states. With that, the conflict had largely come to an end. It would be remembered in a rather negative light, an honorable cause that spiraled out of control, or a war of imperialist expansion and corporate interest that led to the death of thousands. Either way, it is seen as a major policy failure by the Commonwealth. Despite this, the Commonwealth benefited greatly. They secured a monopoly on the logging and fishing industries, while also managing to gain control over trade between northern Canada and the East Coast. Not to mention the increase in territory, population, and influence. The Commonwealth was now a true post-war power.